So, as we go through the sound in time uh, evolution, I would say, uh, both conceptually and historically, I think this is the point where we kind of going to discuss history from the perspective of um, what the historians and social scientists usually consider, which is the social aspects of events and especially music in our case. But as we talk about music in time, just to get the ideas together, we spoke about music as a very abstract form of organizing sound by humans, which could be, of course, different across cultures and through history. Um, we started the journey by thinking about the physics, and then we'll link this to perception, cognition. But the point that we arrive at today, which is kind of pretty much towards the end of this list, is the social structure and technology in general. Uh, so it could, this approach can go both ways. You can think about music that actually reflects the society. So the conceptual view of the world, the relations between establishment and individual, we experience this and we express this using musical terms. Um, Actually, Jacques Attali, and in reference to the readings of his book, does even something more radical. He claims that music supersedes or predicts these events. So the music, as it's more of a non-material form of human production, uh, is free of many of the constraints that later uh, general produce or science and technology and then the economy um, um, encounter. So if we are able to um, analyze or see this larger perspective in the way music evolves, we might be even able to predict what will happen in the future. So as we go through these phenomena, uh, we need to have this view of music over time, how the rules of music changed, and then how this will be reflected, or so the hypothesis, okay, or the challenge here that I would like to bring up uh, is whether the changes in style. So we have a list here of musical styles going from medieval to postmodern. Each one had some very significant modification, both of the way music was produced, the musical instruments, the rules of music composition, and also the function and the role of music in the social sense. And then if we are aware of what happened in the music, and it does require kind of digging or diving into the details of music, what actually happened, what changed in the music, how it can be explained from this broader perspective. If we are able to see that change in a little bit more of an abstract way, then can we find a parallel in other domains, in technology and communication and social structure as well? So there are several challenges we want to talk about. One, understanding the musical timeline. Another one, understanding the technological and the historical evolution throughout these periods. And then linking this to social um, social changes. So there is an underlying question of, even in the title, political economy of music, we assume that there is something that is what political and economy and politics, how they're related. So just introduce this term, and then we'll go back to talk about this chronological, historical development. Uh, I just want to define political economy. So, of course, if if some of you take economics and are familiar with these terms, feel free to jump in with questions or even define. Normally, I would ask you, well, can anybody explain us what is a political economy? Somehow in Zoom sessions, it's a little difficult. So let me kind of switch to website. I hope everybody, when I switch the screens, please let me know if you don't see what I'm talking about. But right now I'm showing a tab on my browser that talks about history of modern political economy. So what is political economy? I'll kind of scroll through the text just as a reference. I can put this link on the chat. But the idea is really that there is an intimate relation and there is a connection between structure of human society and close the chat. Structure of human society, which is a political structure, right? The policies of handling social issues, and the economy. Now, of course, there is a lot of history, and it starts with Adam Smith and David Ricardo, where the markets and the trade started developing in the 18th and 19th century. But in some sense, one of the landmarks is the Marxist type of thinking, which started with his publications of the Capital, or maybe Capital was his grand publications towards the end of his life. So this accumulation of his theories, the Critic of Political Economy. So what is the idea, or how social structure and economics are related? So even before him, the idea of labor theory of value, which relates production of goods and commodities and the social structure. So in the economy, the value of a product was kind of related to the amount of effort or labor that you put into this. So if something is quick to produce, doesn't require much labor, it will be cheaper than other products which require a lot of labor around them. So Marx kind of developed this further on by defining what is commodity as the value of this commodity as entity that is being sold and traded. And this was the building block of economy, or what he called capitalist economy. And after that, he basically spoke, and I'm kind of skimming through the paper. This is not your required reading, it's just kind of helping maybe if you want to go and read this more in detail. But he defined what he called surplus value. And this is basically the capital. Capital means any extra profit that the industrialists gain from letting other people work for him. He owns the productions because he owns the factories, so you have a choice that you have to go and work in a factory because otherwise it won't be produced. And the profit that the industrial makes from his worker creates the capital. So, so this whole theory, which was then further developed into the idea of classes and the base and the superstructure, is kind of the basis of the Marxist theory of economy. So it's really, at the time of his writing, he kind of pointed out the difference in classes. So he kind of brought the social structure into the economy, because he claimed that the economy cannot exist if there is no exploiter. Somebody there, the proletariat who are exploited, and there is the owners of the means of production and the superstructure that actually exists on the base. I'm not going to argue about political theories or economic theories that relate to political theories, but just kind of to maybe point to another idea, Hegel's perspectives and his idea of dialectics, of thinking, of philosophy, Marx turned into what it's called materialist dialectic. Because everything, all the negotiations you do, all your reasoning about life and dialectics is really about who owns what. Uh, a bit radical, frankly, to my opinion, thinking that all you care about is who owns who and who is suppressing whom. But the materialist dialectic is basically the basis of uh, uh, Marx's way of thinking. Now, if we go to culture, then the question is, can these ideas be discussed in cultural perspective? So this actually became the basis of critical theory, and I'm sure you will encounter this idea of critical theory in many other domains. And this actually developed much later. Okay, if Marx was in 1870s, and this is more than half a century later, the Frankfurt School of Sociology and Political Philosophy was very much grounded on Marx's ideas. And then, of course, the more radical of this was the Communist Manifesto that claimed that the society is determined by means of production. And the capitalists, kind of just summarize what I said before, you have the owners, who are the capitalists, and the workers, the proletariat. And it actually took this idea also towards the context of media, culture, music, and so on. We will not be going into later like postmodern theories of communication in the sense of media theory, but McLuhan, with his media is the message, Marshall McLuhan, he kind of rejected these theories, claimed that the means of production, the communication itself supersedes the means of production. But the idea of the culture as an industry was very powerful. Then even later postmodernists talked about new or simulated postmodern perception of reality. So all of this is kind of the context or the background against which Attali developed his ideas. And Attali was an economist, so it was pretty amazing that his early writings and book that actually one of his claims to fame was really his career in economics took off. If is there a question? Yes. Mm-hmm.
Can you explain what does the postmodern mean?
So
Go back
postmodern.
to Asian time?
Sorry, can you say it again? What does the postmodern mean in?
Go back to what it was before?
Right. Okay. So postmodernism, in some sense, claims that meanings of things are deconstructed uh, from the period where, well, we need to actually go through and decide what is modernism after the classical thing. But postmodernism, in some sense, is the idea that the language has a meaning of itself. A lot of this has to do with the structure of the language, and that the ideas of simulation and the postmodern perception of reality, the communication takes over a lot of the modern structures, which actually were more focused on the way the world should operate, some rules of, let's say, in design. The modernist school of architecture was really kind of based on ideas of what would be the ideal shape and form, how you could create meaning. Structuralist approaches are very modern approaches when you can kind of see an idea, the desire kind of apply scientific method, but kind of a larger scale scientific method of understanding how structures are related to the overall functioning of an object, of a reality, and you're trying basically to define optimal experiences, optimal architecture. Um, Given that, I think with the advance of a lot of this has to do with the really the proliferation of television and communication theory, the symbolic aspect of this, just the meaning that is created through the language itself, medium. So I would say when say medium is the message, this is really kind of the start of this postmodern theory in a sense that it has its own existence. It's not so much the previous idea. Deconstructivism, body out. It's going to be interesting to see if let's mesh up and the focus on sound design today, in some sense, is a way to deconstruct. So you construct and reconstruct the meaning in ways that maybe the previous structuralist approaches did not support. It's a little bit of just an abstract approach, but I would say let's keep just in mind that there is a trajectory going from classical to modern, and then there is the postmodern approach. And hopefully, through discussion, it will be a little bit more. I'll give some more concrete examples. So, about society structure. So, yes, so this is what we want to go and jump into the society. Postmodernism, orchestral music for video games. Well, I mean, I think today the freedom of blending structures in a way could be a little bit viewed as postmodern, but orchestra itself, and I think this is a good chance to go back to the discussion of how things evolved in time. Orchestra itself is viewed as actually an early industrial revolution. So let me kind of go back and go through the timeline. I think that will be very helpful. So for that, I kind of chose this mind map, if you want to call this, representations of musical styles. I'll put it on canvas, but it kind of gives historical overview. Just putting this as these branching graphs maybe makes possibility to emphasize some of the ways of thinking that it split. But we go here from medieval to Renaissance, Baroque, then classical, and then romantic, and then contemporary. Okay, so contemporary and modern, I would say, would be pretty much the same. So let me kind of zoom in and see how things evolve. And by doing this, I will try kind of to go and jump between this, okay, this graph that kind of summarizes musical periods and musical timeline, and another graph, which is this one, which is timeline of historical events from economical perspectives, okay, and actually it has classical, romantic, well, also in jazz, in music impressionist, jazz, rock and roll, and so on. But it also has these other aspects. Let me kind of zoom out a little bit and then zooming back. Has environmental, social, technological, economic. Okay. Now, of course, any of these graphs have the advantage and disadvantage of giving you this kind of bird's eye view and perspective on this big history view of society and history. But I mean, all of them, of course, have to choose some events that they consider more significant, less significant. I will try to look, because I want to more economical. We can talk later about the social aspects, because the political economy is kind of relating the economical and social changes. But let me go and focus for now on the technological and economical changes, because in some sense, the technology is seen as technology/science. The way we understand the world and the tools we produce in in this critical theory, if you want to say Marxist approach, is seen as the driver of change. And that causes changes in social structures. Now, what I want to ask if we can see these changes in music before. So I'm not saying that the music will immediately affect the changes, or the music represents one. There is like a one-on-one match between social structures and musical language. But I would like kind of to go and talk about the social role of music after we cover these things. Okay, so I hope you can kind of follow my logic. So the premise is there are some changes in music, in the way we think about music, that could be thought as changes basically in our approach to the world through science, technology, and the way we think, which are also then related to social structures. So let's kind of like, by zooming in, I will try kind of to claim that there is interesting correlation between what Attali will claim later on in his paper and some of these timelines. But it could be that, because he defines 4 periods, I'm kind of a little bit jumping forward, he defines 4 big periods of musical change or musical evolution. And because there's such big chunks of music, of history, you can always claim that maybe the way he interprets music is a little, I would say, anecdotal. I mean, that's one of the dangers when looking into these things. You pick and choose your evidence to support your theory. But maybe, looking at a lot of fine detail, you will find contradictions or special cases. So what is a special case? What's anecdotal evidence? What is kind of an underlying truth? I will leave this to your discussion, really. But I would like to basically make this postulate that Attali makes, present this in some way that gives some evidence to the fact that it seems to be to hold some interesting truth in it. But I welcome you to go and contradict this as well, or find instances that support or don't support this. So let me kind of go now. So our game right now is to go and jump back and forth between this graph and this, and try to see if we can find some parallels. And just even the idea of finding these parallels is going to be an interesting exercise. So what does music rules and technology have to do? And I'm not talking about technology of recording and electronic instruments. Technology in the sense of this very abstract conceptual approach to to the world, to science, and ways we use tools to produce things. So the medieval period, right? And the Goodall's film, I think it was a great introduction to kind of that early evolution of music. We speak mostly about monophonic music, one note sung at a time. I hope you can see this graph, this image here, section from this document. We speak about chant, the Gregorian chant, its religious function, and the composers like Guillaume de Machaut, Perotin. These are the examples. This is the type of music that dominates that period. Now, actually, there isn't in this graph anything from this early period. We'll actually start the trying to find the parallels only later on. Okay, in the 1700s. But there was actually an evolution here, okay, that introduces polyphonic music. You have 2 or more voices or notes sung at the same time. We started having, in the Renaissance period, chordal writing, chants. So there's something happened in the Renaissance. So kind of to be able to look into this aspect, I'll also use another set of timelines, historical timelines, that kind of poses the question, is music and media always new, and then philosophies and our social concepts drag behind? Actually, something happened in the 15th century. And I would say a very technological, even though this is not the industrial revolution per se, it wasn't means of production, but the press evolved, right? So as I said, we'll jump then. You see there's this huge gap between anything that happened before to the 1830s, where you have already also photography. This is kind of a timeline of electronic media and film later on. But the evolution or the ability to distribute knowledge in the written form, this was very important because also this period, the nomes and the music notation became very dominant. And in order to be able to define rules of music and talk about relations between voices and develop techniques of canons and one voice that then is followed by another voice with different time signatures. All of that required some ability to abstract the music. I mean, it wouldn't be, it would be practically impossible to start developing polyphony and, motets and, Ockingham and Deprez and Dufay, all of these examples, and of course Dunstable that the film talks a lot about him, started kind of building a little bit of that abstract representation of knowledge that allowed adding complexity to music. Now, why is this a Renaissance period? Because this is kind of a big revolution in terms of approach to science, right? This is where the scientific discovery started. And scientific discovery also started with the ability to, do math, right? Newton and mechanics and everything. This is all written in a symbolic form that allows us to do reasoning. And this is kind of the breakthrough towards scientific revolution or technological revolution. So given that, we can jump to the Baroque period. And the Baroque period actually had a lot of new instruments being developed. And also the emergence of some new phenomena like opera, which is kind of these big stage things. Orchestra itself became more and more dominant. And of course, Bach is like development of polyphony and understanding of harmony, really big breakthrough. But Monteverdi with his operas and Vivaldi, the instrumental writing and the ability to think about orchestration, how different lines relate, that's kind of the 1600 to 1750. Again, it's a little bit before the industrial changes that we'll start looking here. But let's move on and get to the classical period. So classical period is 1750. And this is the period where you actually had all the instruments pretty much standardized. The orchestra was already developed. And the interesting thing that happened here is that you could now start mass producing music, not in the sense of distributing, it's still before the recording period, but producing in a way that you had the separation of labor. You had the composer who would write score, you had professional musicians who were organized in orchestras, So if you think about this as a conveyor belt of production, and you think about musicians as basically part of this big machine, Attali kind of claims that this is a period where kind of it's the precursor to the Industrial Revolution. I mean, just to go back and point to some of his other periods. So, kind of the role of religion and the idea of music being dominated by the church or the religious institutions, right? That's where he speaks about the role of music in controlling violence. But for him, that was kind of that sense, you know, the establishment, the religion, or whatever, would be the one that uses music in very formal ways. And this is the idea of, you know, the representation. So when he goes from the early, the first step, the second one, the representation step, that kind of relates to the ability to start thinking about music in abstract ways, same way that the representation, the writing and the scientific and mathematical theories are representation. So there's this change that kind of symbolizes this period. And then that becomes for him the predictor of industrial period. So if we go and jump to this graph, the 1750 here, the Industrial Revolution is actually 1790, or the peak of this in terms of economy is in the 1800s. So it's kind of like 50 years, you know, and again, the boundaries of these periods are a little flexible. But if we follow these numbers, let's say, if we add 50 years, so if 1750 was really kind of the classical period already flourishing, 50 years later, the peak of the Industrial Revolution happened. Now, what was the Industrial Revolution? Well, the engine. So if you think about the ideas of steam engines, steamships, railroads, actually the steam engine at the peak of its deployment, that's kind of where you also started having the factories. So if you want to agree, and I totally accept also if you disagree, that orchestra is a factory, but the division of labor maybe is something that is very typical to orchestral writing. So maybe the orchestras here predicted, or 50 years earlier, predicted, you know, the constructions of factories. Now, if we keep on going and move from the classical period to romantic period, there is also something interesting about the way we start thinking about people as consumers, people as nations. One interesting thing about the classical period is, and this graph kind of talks about the idea that music becomes much more emotional or expressive and pays much more attention to mood. So it kind of could be pointed as a parallel to even our understanding of what a human being is. You know, the whole humanistic approach actually treats the individual as a very complex creation, right? You have your rights, you have your you know, feelings of emotions, of likes, dislikes. Marx later on talks about with the industrial world is that the worker is basically alienated. But you know, you can ask yourself, well, actually, I don't want to sound, oh, my connection, internet connections are too great, but too radical. But before that, somebody would ask, does a person even have emotions, right? We think sometimes we can argue about you know, animals today. Oh, do they? Well, they have emotions, but what is their level? You know, at a certain point, people wouldn't be treated emotionally. I mean, of course, you had emotions, but it wouldn't be something that really is consideration, right? You wouldn't try to build music to trigger emotions. You would build music, or you would compose music, build music, sorry, to have a function, right? You might also have some kind of a well-constructed, beautiful music that would embellish the houses or the concert halls of the royalty, right? It wasn't trying to appeal to an individual. It wouldn't, like the opera started doing this because it started talking about love and affairs and expressions. But this is the culmination of the idea that actually the story itself, the engagement of the person, the idea that you want to invoke emotions in music rather than have control over masses of people in church, or create a very elaborate musical constructions that are beautiful, uh, but kind of the emphasis of the idea that the person itself is important and the emotions are part of what the music conveys, could be more traced towards the classical period. Now, that also means that you want to talk to the individual. So opera, in some sense, at least in Attali's mind, is the beginning of a market economy for music. Because operas, people would go and buy tickets, and you actually needed to be able to speak to, each individual emotion, or to their common experiences, right? People that wouldn't be the royalty, they would go to the operas, right? So you actually have to talk to them in the language that actually appeals to the individual, and emotional aspects would be one of them. So this kind of also can be seen as the beginning of the market economy that the Industrial Revolution then actually um, flourished on, right? Or created. Now, in the Romantic period, right? So we have the factories, but the orchestra. So if you think this orchestra is a factory, it came before the factory. Okay, that's kind of a claim that Italy claims. Now, if we want to keep moving on, actually the Romantic period, uh, so that's the 1830s. If we want to jump here and see what happened in the 80s, okay. So we said, like, we jumped from the classical period, 50 years, to claim that in the economy this was the predictor of this. Then the Romantic period, if we add 50 years, we jump here. Technologically, yes, we have the development of communication. We have the development of telegraph, electricity. The messaging became much more important. But here, it's actually a good chance to go and think about what happens in uh, in society. Let me see if I can find that aspect. Um, okay, maybe I won't start searching on this graph, but let me go back to the musical graph. We talk about nationalistic purpose. Okay, now related or unrelated to you know the emergence of industrial revolution and capitalism, but the idea of nation state actually happened pretty much at the same time. So the idea of group identity, the idea of a nation, right, which is different from the royalties and the way um, political structures were divided or powers were divided before. Of nationalism started also being very much predicted by music. Uh, so you would have not only a personal identity, so Tchaikovsky's music would be, I don't know if to say more Russian, but it had very different properties. Wagner would basically, of course, Wagner would be, writing his Valkyries and build on the German mythology to create the German identity, which was then, picked up later by the Nazis and made into a symbol. nationalism was kind of predicted by the Romantic period, and then going from 1830 to 1920, which is a huge jump, and the modern period is basically, so 1830 in this graph, if we add 50 years, it's 1880. So we kind of predicted this, we predicted this. I would say the next 1920, if we add 50 years, we end up here. So for the modern time, right, that this one, right, 1920, contemporary music and post-war, the question, did it predict anything in the 1970s? It's hard for me to say, because I think this is kind of a little bit stretching things. But it's definitely evident that, after the electricity and telegraph were developed, actually the communications, both in terms of electronic communications, but the mobility, the aviation, the radio and television here, these all became very, very dominant as part of our structure. So um, um, that kind of talks to the to this replication period that Attali talks about. So what is this replication period? So music replication is actually related very much to the development of recording technology, right? Now we kind of talk about something seems to be unrelated. Why do we care so much recording as a way that changes music? I mean, did the musical language change or just the means of distribution change? Well, frankly, I think when Attali talks about music replication period, he refers to the fact that music started being distributed differently. It's less about the changes in the musical language and the changes in the attitude to music that we were talking about with, let's say, the intoners and the whole noise manifesto, right? So we're not talking about the futurism as bringing other aspects of sounds into it. It was also enabled by the recording technology or the electronic technology, later on really used a lot, but just the idea that music could be recorded and then distributed in the same fashion to many more people. This is, in some sense, in Attali's mind, is a predictor for this basically consumer culture, and the idea that I don't know if I don't think steel and petroleum have much to do with this, but the idea that here in the in the communication world, the messaging, the ability to replicate the same message over and over, and then same way, maybe since the early industrial revolution started producing big machines, and then the communication, but now we actually mass produce any consumer objects, and the huge chains, the huge supermarket stores, or I don't know if today Amazon and stuff like that is a good example, but the idea is that everything is mass replicated, and then the whole structure of the society becomes basically consumer society, where you have a lot of cheap products that go and flood basically not only flood the economy, it also changes the mindset of the consumer, it changes the mindset of us, how we think about music. So the emergence of the radio star, and then the MTV, that role of music as a mass consumption product is really evident that it happened. And then the question is how it's addressed, or can one see this as a predictor that's one of the claims that that Attali suggests. Now, as we go on, actually, there are some more or newer aspects that his book, when he claims that the last stage is the composition stage, are a little bit speculative, because he wrote this in the 70s, and we are, you know, at least 50 years after his book. He called this as the composition age, where maybe he was influenced again by these postmodern theories that not only that you replicate the same message and you distribute this in massive way, but you also now give more and more ability for people to communicate and have this idea, which is a little bit like what we spoke here, the idea that concept of communication, that you create a reality by communicating and sharing things between people, that becomes much more of a ability that everybody can participate with. And you can argue this in both ways. Of course, you know, with the internet and with all the possibilities of communication, everybody has a voice. But on the other hand, you have these huge, you know, global economic powers that control. You know, Google has more money than many countries, and Amazon. So, did it lead to democratization of communication? I think the view, or what Attali was predicting, is really more of a segmentation of the market into the ability of everyone to have his own production. So trying to go one step further and see if we really get to more fine-grained ability to predict by changes in musical styles as the technology evolves. So this evolution, I think this slide is also in my original lecture videos. We spoke about futurism, right, Russollo's Manifesto, and we spoke about the idea that the recording and the magnetic tape allowed the music concrete to be created, Stockhausen with electronic music and the synthesizers. Then, of course, our own US Max Matthews, who actually used digital computers to start synthesizing his Max. Well, actually the early the C sound language, which then became you know, Miller, you know, my colleague right across the office across mine, who developed the Max language. That's a tribute to Max. So the evolution of programming languages for music, really. And then other things, you know, we mentioned Kraftwerk. I think in Discord there was some discussion of Autobahn Kraftwerk, noise, and Japan noise, techno. We have a lot of these technological, this is all really very much technologically driven. So how can we see, or how can we take any of these technological evolutions and say, well, we understand what's going on here musically. This is where society is going, you know, to find itself. Maybe not 50 years, because the pace of evolution is much faster. But even in 5 or 10 years, if you can make this prediction, that would be tremendously powerful. Actually, Attali did claim later on that he can at least do some sort of a prediction of consumption patterns of people based on their musical preferences, which is slightly kind of taking back this grand vision into more of a marketing approach, and then there isn't much prediction, it's more like analytics. But thinking about where we are right now, just the evolution of the internet from bulletin boards into web, where everybody could post his own stuff, I think it is a very fast-paced and very important development because we are all now flooded in media, and I don't know if it shapes our minds or whatever the influence it has on politics or on its social powers, but it is very powerful today. Uh, Going to musical, and I see there are some comments, so I'll jump there in a second. A little bit like just motivating the later on jump to technology and AI. Um, and so we can kind of summarize some of the main revolutions. The Industrial Revolution, okay, which we kind of related to the emergence of uh, before that of the scientific approaches to well, scientific approach in general to uh, the Renaissance, and then the development of musical languages in the symbolic of the science to be developed that led to the Industrial Revolution, which is the communication, the electrical, and then the computer. This leads to the last one. We have a lot of music being also composed by machines, uh, whether algorithmic composition or attempts to write music using even neural networks. That was very early with any kind of evolution in artificial intelligence. Did it predict the new uh, revolution out that? But it definitely happens in parallel, but it also will change the way music is done, and especially in games. So let me jump back to the chat and see because before I go. Uh, okay, yes, Kraftwerk. Okay, they have weird sounds. Also, a lot of this, is kind of the autobahn. They also have a lot of the messaging about this fast communications. Will there be examples? In Canvas, we kind of do put a lot of musical examples for each sound. Probably not today. We're kind of running a little bit late, but I will try to make sure that we have maybe the same kind of a parallel summary. Again, just the musical history, the film, the good old film, gives a lot of examples, but it doesn't hit the 20th century really. Um, so going back to where we are in terms of music, the last idea of Attali, the last idea that we are in the compositional stage, right, kind of brings up the question of where is music today? Possibly already outdated because this is, I don't know, 5 or 10 years old, the concept of music 3.0, which was taken from Web 3.0, was the idea that music becomes like a combined art of creation, content production, also content sharing in databases, and the community. Uh, so, kind of as a survival guide for the new musician, the question was, well, what does the musician need to know today? And the fact is that, yes, you have your digital audio workstations and you have your production tools available. So, not anymore you're dependent on the big studios. You can basically become a producer with very low overhead or affordable budget. Then a lot of the musicians actually share contents. You share stamps. You share your sound samples or clips or musical instrument, even electronic presets. So a lot of this is kind of a sharing and content sharing, maybe more on a professional level. But then the fact that the musicians are celebrities, I mean, how much of fame and celebrity structure is related to actually the quality of your music. Um, and it doesn't have to be in a global scale. So one of the things that the Music 3.0 advocates um, is that musicians need to have sufficient number of fans, or true fans, what they call, to allow you to make your living. So a true fan, I don't remember the exact definitions, but somebody who, let's say, spends during a year a couple of $100 either on buying your CDs, downloading your music, or going to your live events. So if you have about 1,000 uh, true fans who over the year pay you about $100 each, you have, if you put, I don't know, $100,000 is not such a bad point, but it takes a time to reach it. So if that's kind of the threshold, then you are basically sustainable music producer, composer, creator who actually has a direct link to the community and also to other professional community, and you need to have all of these abilities, basically to deal with the musical content, to know how to share this, and have also some mastery of social tools. Whether this is really what Attali predicted, if this is really the big change in a political economy that we see in music, will that be the same all over, or whether we still will see the more and more actually money or capital concentrated by the big corporations. I think there are a lot of arguments that, whatever we see in music and what will happen, there are a lot of interesting things to think about. So agree and disagree. But I would say some possible questions, and this is not this is not related to your assignment as such, but in view of what I presented, you could say what I hope you take from our discussion is that there are actually indeed changes in patterns of music production and consumption, and what happened in the culture. So whether, today, let's say, the fact that music became very ubiquitous, how, how this became ubiquitous because of the technological changes, how that will have any sense of prediction. So when and how changes in music technology moved from being technical to being creative, that's another idea. For instance, how music concrete shifts from replication to composition. That's a question. Now, once you have AI creating music, it's actually not anymore a musical instrument. It has its own autonomy. So will that be, and this is the discussion later on in the class, so I'm kind of a little bit doing a spoiler here. And what will be the role of the human if music is created artificially? But the last one is really, can we prove or reject Attali's conjecture in view of this timeline of musical, technological, and social changes? So given all this long introduction, trying to justify or at least give kind of substantiate some of the elements and giving some background to what Attali's chapter tries to later deal with, I will kind of maybe pause the recording or stop the recording and get a little bit more into the discussion. So let me kind of do that. So going kind of to summarize the political economy of music, right? there is evidently an evolution of musical thought from totally ritual structure, uh, um, where maybe this link that Attali tries to bring of music as control of violence, the same way the early governments or the early religious institutions would basically organize people through fear and through control of violence. Uh, that linkage between use of music in these rituals could be understood in this sense. Of course, the church had a lot to do with specifying and defining rules of musical thinking, and the whole idea of triton and dissonance as being forbidden. We mentioned this in the lecture notes. It has to do with some ideology that also the church tried to kind of control. And then the evolution of notation that allowed us to go through this representation phase and start developing more of a scientific thinking about music. And later on, as we go through the evolution of orchestras as maybe an early factory model, where you have coordination of different modalities and as I said, like a conveyor belt of production, where you have specialization on different means of productions. The idea that music became more of a marketplace, and then people would basically go and consume music, that had also to change with the approach to music to becoming more sentimental, more personalized, emphasis on drama, on opera, the emotional aspects of music, and that also is kind of that part of moving towards the market economy. Now, in the replication stage, of course, the invention of telecommunications and the ways of recording, and then the big change in the patterns of consumption of music, the musical star, the radio star, the record stores, and possibly even overproduction of music. There's some interesting interviews with Attali about the idea that we are maybe having too much music available because it's so ubiquitous and so easy to produce. Now, the idea of the means of production in music today, the digital workstation, the DAWs, digital audio workstations, that actually allow us to become producers very easily. And the idea of musical instruments and musical robots, whether this becomes a new age of either AI, and where the compositional stage comes through all of this, which was something that Attali predicted. I kind of leave it pretty much open. So yeah, I think that's kind of gives the summary of these stages, and here they are in terms of Attali's codes: sacrifice, representation, repetition, composition. Really big chunks, and kind of historically related. So okay, so I'll go back to the chat in a second. I'll stop the recording, and I hope this kind of gives a little bit more of, will make sense of what he talks in the paper. So thanks for listening to all that.